Hello and welcome to my video on knife lock and joint mechanisms. It's a video that I've really wanted to do for quite some time, but I've never had enough knives and examples for me to do the video justice. And if I do miss out any that you come across on a day-to-day basis, please just put it down below in the comments, share your experiences. These are just a selection of the knives and most of them have different locks. We'll go through what I'd classify as the most common lock, which is the Walker liner lock. Locking system developed by custom knife maker Michael Walker, and it uses a leaf-like spring split from the liner to wedge laterally against a ramped surface on the tang of the blade. My prime example here is a Spyderco Military. You deploy the blade and the lock goes in place. It's the most common. It's inside of the handle scales there. Notice on this it doesn't have a liner, the opposite side, only a liner on this side here. If there's a cutout for the handle, that's even better, because that means that you can just disengage the lock without too much fuss, and it's a lot easier. If the handle scale is flush with the bar, then it becomes quite difficult to disengage it. But that's one of the most common locks in locking folding knives, the liner lock. You can see it on value knives, on Kershaw's, you can see it on CRKT knives. So yeah, that's one of the most common kind of locks in knives. It's just the liner that's within the handle scale that is on a spring, and it just moves and engages just under the blade and locks the knife in place. No lock is infallible, even though cold steel say their tri-ark lock is infallible. In my opinion, no lock's infallible. This can, if given enough force, collapse, like all of them here. If given enough force, it may fail on you. So if you're ever in a position where you're using a knife in a very taxing situation, you're always better going for a full tang fixed blade knife. But anyway, that's the most common in my opinion, and it's the one you'll probably see the most, is a liner lock, a Walker liner lock. The next one isn't really a lock at all. It's a Slipit, or a slip joint. It's a non-locking folding knife that opens via one-handed operation and features a pocket clip, and they're held open by spring pressure against a notch in the blade's tang. This is an example of a Slipit. It's a non-locking knife. It's got a 90-degree kind of stop, so there's a notch there within the blade, and then again it's held there by the spring, and there's the notch, and it's just held there. But that's just held by, because this back part of the knife is on a spring, so it really wants to push down on the blade, and then it pushes in and it goes into the blade itself, into that notch. But because it's on a spring, with enough force you can push the spring tang part out, and it'll just disengage. But there is no lock. It doesn't stay there and then it's locked in place. There's no lock to disengage. That's a classic example of a non-locking or slip-it knife. Almost in the same kind of category, but it's not one-handed opening, is a case knife or a Texas toothpick. Yes, it's not one-handed opening, but you can see there something starting to protrude, and that's the tang of the knife on a spring, and again goes into the notch. So it works on the same kind of principle, non-locking. Anyway, let's move back to locking knives, and we'll now talk about a lock that's similar to the liner lock, but just takes it one step further. And that's the Chris Reeve Integral Lock, or the RIL. It was developed by Chris Reeve, who's a custom knife maker. It's similar to the Walker liner lock, but it uses a lock bar that's integral to one of the handle scales, rather than it be a separate liner. So this may look similar to a liner lock. This is the Spyderco Sage 2, in that normally you'd have an extra piece of metal there that's kind of almost under pressure, and it would move under the blade. But in this case, it's part of the handle itself. So this is the frame lock. In my opinion, I don't think that it's any more secure than a liner lock. If the liner itself has been treated and manufactured correctly, I don't see how this could be any more secure. This is pushing against that blade when it's disengaged just as much as on a liner lock. Yeah, so that's the frame lock. It's just a little bit of a different version of the liner lock. Again, I don't think that I would classify it as any more secure. If anything, I'd probably say it might be less secure, because when you're holding it and you're gripping it tightly and you're putting it under force, if your hand slips upwards maybe, it might disengage that. There's less chance of that happening on a liner lock, in my opinion, just because that liner is inside the actual handle scale that you're holding. But I've never heard of any serious cases of that happening. So that's your frame lock. There are a couple of knives that take this frame lock even further. So one such knife is this knife by CRKT, the Otonashi no Ken. It's a frame lock, as you can see there. Nice to disengage too. But it's got this lock system, and all this does is it just then puts a bar between the actual frame kind of liner itself, so it can't really go anywhere. It just gives it a bit more of a secure, almost fixed blade kind of feel to it, because it's not really going anywhere. But that can fail and the liner can fail, but it just adds an extra step up. But it's not something that you definitely rely on to not fail. But I just thought I'd mention that some manufacturers have added kind of like a little solution to the problem that I've just kind of discussed. So that's that. Still a frame lock, but it's got an additional kind of thing. Another frame lock, I don't know why, it's no different really, but is the Kershaw leak. Again, I just wanted to give you another example of another manufacturer that has a frame lock. So yeah, there you go. And then another lock that can be quite common. I mean, I'm carrying one now, the Endurer, but I've got another example of it here, which is the back lock, which is a locking system which is positioned on the back of the handle, and it uses a rocker arm that pivots in the centre, and a lug on one end of the arm engages a notch in the blade's tang to lock the blade open. Lock the blade open. See where I'm coming from? So as you can see, you open the blade, so you push on there and it sort of opens, but then when it gets to a certain point, it snaps in place and it's pretty strong. The only way you're going to disengage that is pushing on there. Has the same sort of potential problem in that if you're pushing too hard or you're really using it too much, you could, in some way, if you don't know how to use a knife properly, you may well disengage that, but it's very tricky to do unless you actually, apply direct pressure. And Spyderco have sort of overcome this problem a bit by putting a bit of a dint in the locking bar there. And some people would say that that's more of a secure lock than a liner lock or a frame lock. But again, yes, it is still a very secure lock, but it can fail like all of these here. So that's the back lock. Again, I'll give you an example of another company that's kind of taken out a bit further, which is Cold Steel. Same kind of system almost, where you're pulling the blade up and it's on this kind of spring, on this pivot, and it locks into place. But they call it the tri-ark lock. It has a couple of other things going on in there that I'm not going to go in this detail, just check out my review. And that is a similar kind of back lock, but it's the same kind of principle. That's another kind of back lock. And then another locking mechanism I've got is called the compression lock. And this can be seen on this knife here, which is the Paramilitary 2. It's super smooth, and the way this works is it uses a leaf-like spring from a split liner in the handle to wedge laterally between a ramp on the blade tang and the stop pin or anvil pin, and it provides extreme lock strength and ease of use. So essentially you can see there, it's almost like a reverse liner lock in a way. I'm probably going to get a lot of heat by calling it that, but you can see the liner in there, and what it does is it not only kind of engages, but it forms this barrier between this anvil and the blade tang itself, rather than just the liner stopping the blade, it's got this anvil, and all those three parts kind of combine, and that's where it gets its strength from. As you can see, loose as anything, but deploy it, very, very strong, ease of use lock, one of my favourites. And finally, we've got the bolt action lock. I think this is a bolt action lock, whereby you've got this, it's developed by Blackie Collins, it's a spring-loaded bolt there, you can see that bolt there, spring-loaded, engages on the ramp of the tang of the blade to lock the blade open. So you could do that, and then that bar stops the blade from going anywhere because it kind of gets in the way of the blade tang itself. And then when you pull the bolt back, the blade tang is free to move as it likes. It's a nice lock, it's a little bit like a back lock but a bit further up, but in my opinion not as secure as a compression lock. This is just another example here of a Gerber lock. This is sort of like a mixture between a back lock and a bolt action lock, in that it's got a bar that runs along down the back of the blade, and it disengages by pulling it back, and it just creates a bar to stop the blade from moving forward because this bar gets in the way. So it's a little bit like bolt action, but it's just attached to a piece of metal that runs down the handle itself. Now, other knife locks that I haven't mentioned is the notch joint, which is a non-locking joint in which the blade is held open by a spring pressure against a notch in the tang. And then there's a couple more locks that I haven't mentioned, such as the ball bearing lock, which basically wedges a ball bearing between a fixed anvil and the blade tang. A little bit like your bolt action, but there's a ball in there that is pushed by a spring. Then there's a ball joint non-locking system, which is a slip joint mechanism that prevents a knife from closing through pressure from ball bearings. And then finally there's the power lock, which is a locking system positioned on the back of the handle using two interlacing rocker arms, one of which engages a notch in the blade's tang to lock the blade open. So they're a couple of extra examples that I don't have, but they're very unique, very specific, and only appear on a small number of knives. These are like the main items and locks and mechanisms that you're going to come up against, and I just thought I'd do this video to kind of educate and explain to you all what's out there and just go into depth a little bit about them all. I would love to take them all apart and show you the insides and things, but I'm not that brave at the moment. Anyway, thanks ever so much for joining me today. Thank you for watching. Take care.